Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Audrey Rindlisbacher. If this podcast is helpful for you, please share, like, pass it along, leave a review, all those great things so we can share out the message of mission and principles with everyone who needs that message. I, of course, all of you should know by now, feel privileged and honored to have David Emerald with us. This is a long-awaited conversation. I've talked to people for years about someday I'm going to have a conversation with David Emerald, and we're going to talk about the power of TED. And this is that day. So I am ecstatic to be able to do this. For those of you who have engaged with the work or been in any of the academies, you know that The Power of TED is a core book that we spend a bunch of time in to learn better self-management and self-leadership skills. And it has been, for many of you, I've heard story after story after story. If you listen to Carolyn's interview recently that came out, one of the most important things that happened to her in the program was learning this book and practicing its principles. So really, really powerful stuff. Today, David's going to tell us more of the backstory. So I'm excited for that. A little bit about him. His full name, which I didn't know until recently, is David Emerald Wommeldorf. Did I say that right?
Very good. Very good.
Nice.
Yes.
He's a creator-in-chief of the Center for the Empowerment Dynamic and co-founder of the Bainbridge Leadership Center in Washington. His passion and work is in supporting individuals, teams, and organizations in leading and working from an outcome-focused and passion-powered orientation. His principles and frameworks are based on his decades of study, observation, and application of his lessons in collaboration with a wide range of individuals and organizations. His pen name is David Emerald, which with Rindlisbacher as a last name, maybe I should have a different pen name, but actually I don't. So I can understand why he did that. He's the author of the best-selling The Power of TED, or the Empowerment Dynamic, a teaching story about self-leadership, and 3 Vital Questions, Transforming Workplace Drama, which is also phenomenal, by the way. I've studied that one quite a bit. This is organizationally focused teaching story, which draws on his over 30 years of experience in leadership development, change leadership, and employee management. David's books are sold worldwide. And I think you can correct me, David, on this, but powerofted.com is going to be the main place I want to send people. Is that right?
No, if you did powerofted.com, where you would end up is at the empowermentdynamic.com.
Okay, .com. Because I went to the Power of TED today and it worked. I didn't notice that maybe the URL had changed, but the empowermentdynamic.com. Perfect. Correct. That's where you're going to want to go to find out about all his stuff. And I'll talk more later about some of the other ways that I've engaged with David and his wife, Donna. They have some other incredible programs. But to get the conversation started, David, can you just give us some of your backstory? What were you doing professionally before all this authorship came up? And maybe what did you learn there that pointed you in this direction? Let's start there.
Wow. The backstory is that prior to the epiphany that led to the Power of TED, eventually to the Power of TED, and I'll certainly share that whole story. I was living in Dayton, Ohio, working in corporate America, focused on management and organization development, had a communication background, and was introduced to Robert Fritz's work and was engaged in a course that was being run at a hospital based on his creating technologies. Became friends with a gentleman named Bob Anderson, who's the founder of the Leadership Circle. And it was just a number of things just kind of came together in my life. And at the time was married, and my wife and I at the time, and this will move into the actual epiphany, my wife and I at the time were trying to start a family, and that wasn't working. And I'm pausing because a big part of the backstory is that, and I know that you have read many times Power of TED, and that you're that use Power of TED in your program, and the things that the character David in the story was facing is autobiographical. So in about an 18-month period, 3 things happened in my life that were quite formative. One was that my dad, who I had a very healthy relationship with, passed away at a much too young age. He was in his early 60s. Again, my wife and I at the time were trying to start a family, and I was declared medically infertile. And she
Oh,
was
wow.
quite introverted, and for whatever reasons, she chose not to have us explore any other options, so that marriage failed.
Oh, wow.
Now, as the marriage was coming apart, we were engaged in some couples therapy and we're doing quite a bit of work. I continued when she decided to withdraw from that. And it was during that period of time that I learned about the Karpman Drama Triangle and
Oh,
its
okay.
roles of victim, persecutor, rescuer. And I'd been working on my own with this therapist for about 3 months. And one morning, I was sitting at my desk doing engaged in what I call my morning quiet time, which is
Yeah.
has always been some um, combination of prayer, meditation, journaling, and I was in that contemplative, prayerful space. And I remember having my eyes closed, and I just remember saying to the God of my understanding, I said, "Okay,
Yeah.
God, I'm ready to surrender my victim stance in the world, but I need to know what's the opposite of victim." And I've got to tell you, Audrey, immediately the word creator came.
That's amazing.
And it was so stark that I just remember my eyes were open and it was like, I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that. And I can't say that I heard a voice, but the experience was such that I could understand someone saying that they had an experience like that and they heard a voice. Um,
Yes.
and I wish I could say like Paul on the road to Damascus that my life was forever changed. That was not the case. It was just a personal epiphany, and I would tell you that I went through because I'm now talking about a good 30 years ago.
Oh,
Or
wow. It's been
yeah,
that
oh
long.
yeah, this is around 1990, 1991.
Just as an aside, when was the book first published then?
In 2005, actually, the 2006.
Okay.
So about a 15-year period. Now,
Wow.
I would say there's about a 10-year period where I would, from time to time, think about it, and then it would fade in the background and life would go on. And I was continued in the corporate world and executive and leadership development, was very involved in the leadership circle that I mentioned earlier, very
Yeah.
powerful feedback process, doing a lot of work with the leadership circle at the University of Notre Dame in their
What kind of
executive
work
integral
did the
leader.
leadership circle do?
It is what's called a 360-degree feedback tool, meaning if you think about an organization chart, 360 degree in the sense of getting feedback from one's boss, one's peers, one's direct reports, perhaps clients, et cetera,
Okay.
around the perceptions that they have around leadership. Now, at the
So you're
time, leadership's
facilitating that conversation, that feedback loop?
exactly, yeah,
Okay.
it's a coaching
Okay.
conversation. And
Uh-huh.
then the leadership circle at the time also had a couple of leadership workshops that I facilitated, co-facilitated, et cetera. And the ways of thinking that are captured, and we'll talk more about this in The Power of TED and in Three Vital Questions, I owe a lot to Bob Anderson in the
Mm,
framing of what I call the victim and creator orientations, or the problem and outcome orientations.
right.
So you asked earlier about how in the backstory, what kind of prepared me for this work.
Yeah.
All of those elements were in there and came together, frankly, in the personal epiphany that I just shared. And
Hmm.
about 10 years or so later, and again, I would play around with it, forget about it, play around with it, but forget about it.
Would
And
you say that, excuse me, I mean to interrupt, but
that's right.
would you say that that insight or revelation or epiphany
Hmm.
changed your behavior at all? Made you see the world differently? Was it having any kind of personal impact before you started to build a model for others?
Yes and no. And the yes is, again, because of the other work that I was doing, just really seeing in the leadership circle that we would talk about a reacting orientation versus a creative orientation. And
Okay.
so that creative orientation, which evolved in my work into a creator orientation,
I see.
certainly impacted me. And I have long been mission driven in my own work.
Yeah.
And from that work, I crafted my own mission statement, which has not changed much since the early 90s.
Wow.
And because I know mission's so important in your work,
Yeah.
I can call it up on my screen real
Oh, I
quick,
would
I'd be
love to
happy to
hear
share
it.
it.
Yes, let's hear it. For you, what does mission mean then? Why did you call it a mission statement?
Because it's what I'm called to do. And, it's mission in the sense of, I mean, it's certainly purposeful, but it,
Yeah,
it felt more like a mission statement than a purpose statement.
yeah.
And so here it is. So I am called to support and facilitate individuals, teams, and organizations in consciously shifting to a co-creative, vision-focused, and passion-motivated orientation for their lives and livelihoods. This is my lifelong ministry of service to humankind. I am a partner in creation with God. As Spirit works in and through me, I serve as a channel of God's abundance, love, wisdom, and power to touch, heal, and transform my own and others' lives and ways of being in the world.
Wow. That is beautiful.
That's
That's
been on
just
my
beautiful.
wall through multiple moves. It really has been, my North Star in terms of all the work. And that existed before I had a name for TED, before I had alternatives to the persecutor and to the rescuer. And I'll share more about that in just a moment. So fast forward about 10 years,
Mhm.
and again was doing a lot of work with the leadership circle, was doing some international work with another consulting company. I had moved out on my own, and so I could live anywhere. And in 2003, I was attending as a participant of a workshop at a place called the Whidbey Institute and met Donna Zajan.
Oh,
And we really connected around a shared interest in leadership. She was coming out of public leadership. She had been an elected official in the Oregon legislature and won't go
oh,
into all
wow.
of her background.
Hmm.
And so in 2004, because I could live anywhere, I ended up moving to the Pacific Northwest as Donna and I were starting to date, and our relationship was really growing. And I initially moved to Whidbey. I live on Bainbridge Island now, where we live on Bainbridge Island. But in the move, the reason why this is germane to the story is
Hmm.
during the move, as I was unpacking and came across one of the journals where I'd played around with an alternative triangle to the Karpman Triangle
Uh-huh.
and his dynamics between victim, persecutor, and rescuer.
Hmm.
And so I had that fresh in mind. I was at Notre Dame and getting ready to do a debrief around this leadership circle profile. Gentleman came in, 6'5", blonde hair, blue eyed, not
Hmm.
an ounce of fat on his body. And the reason why I share that is that within minutes, I knew that he was a third generation military, had led a platoon in the first Gulf War, and had been in the private sector now for about 3 years.
Okay.
And we get into our conversation. And the night before, they had done some art therapy work with an art therapist. And he had his journal, and he opened his journal, and also very important part of
Hmm.
his persona is he was very, very traditional and fundamental in his Christian belief.
Okay.
And
Hmm.
the reason why that's relevant is he opens this journal, and I'm just going to hold up
So this is
a
his journal that he's been
yeah,
writing in over the course of
right.
this. Okay.
And he's got little stick figure kind of pictures, and I can't remember
Okay.
exactly what the pictures were, but it was two military, moving my finger, two military oriented
Uh-huh.
pictures, and then Bible, and I think maybe a cross. And then in the middle, he had VS for verses. So it was like military versus his faith.
Okay.
And I said, "Tell me about the verses." And he said, "Well," he said, I'm really struggling as a leader in the private sector around how to deal with conflict." And I said, "Well, when you were leading a platoon, how did you deal with conflict?" Well, we said in the military, it's really pretty straightforward. You contain, control, and move off to the side. And I said, "Yeah, well, that probably doesn't work too well in organizational life."
Uh-huh.
And he goes, "No." And he goes, and people come into my office and they're just such victims. And I went,
That
"Oh."
triggered something for you.
And
Yeah.
again, because the orientations come out of the leadership circle work, I could make really quick review of that for him. And I said, let me share something with you that is related to this. And
Uh-huh.
so I shared with him the drama triangle, which for him at that point, and I know for me when I first started, was what I in the book call a blinding flash of the obvious. It's like,
Yeah.
and he said, "Oh,
Me too.
that's it. That's what I experienced."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, as you shift your focus to more of the creative orientation, or again in this work, what I call a creator orientation,
Yeah.
it makes possible a different set of relationship roles and dynamics." So at the time, creator has always been the antidote or the opposite of victim. At
Hmm.
the time, the label I had for what became challenger was teacher.
Oh,
So what does this come into my life to cause me to learn, grow,
yes.
develop?
Yes.
And what became coach as the antidote to the role of rescuer was servant.
Oh, wow. I love
And
those too, those alternate titles.
yeah, well, so we got into this in this deep conversation, just got into a flow state. We get toward the end of our 90 minutes together. And I just remember sitting there, Audrey, and I looked at him and I looked at the whiteboard and I looked back at him. And again, given his faith, I said, creator, teacher, servant. Can you think of three words to better describe the life of Christ? And he was like, oh no, I got it. I got it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Um,
so beautiful.
yeah. Thanks. So that's again part of the backstory. So the next morning, I'm at the little South Bend, Indiana airport, and I call Donna, and Donna is a longtime master certified coach or professional coach.
Uh-huh.
And she said, how'd your coaching sessions go? And I said, well, I had one that was pretty remarkable last night. And I told her uh, the story.
Yeah.
And Donna's quite extroverted. And this is back in the Verizon advertising days where it was like, can you hear me now? And
Uh-huh.
so I shared the story with her and I get silence. And I got full bars. I said, are you still there? She said, yes. She said, is that original work? I said, no, the drama triangle's been around since the 1960s.
Yeah.
She said, no, the other triangle. And I said, well, yeah, I guess it's just something I've thought about off and on for years. And and she said, you have got to write that down. That could be so useful to other people.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I'll continue just on the journey in the story here because there's
Yeah.
some pretty remarkable things that emerged. So came back, we're out for a walk one evening. It's like, well, what am I going to call this, or what are we going to call this alternative triangle?
Mm-hmm.
And in the course of that conversation, hit upon the empowerment dynamic. Okay, it's an empowerment dynamic.
Yeah.
And the next morning, we're sitting doing our quiet time, and my monkey mind's going. That's going
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
empowerment dynamic,
Yeah.
TED, and I went, it's got a name. It came out of
Wow. Uh-huh.
the quiet time, and I told Donna that. So over the course of probably 2 to 3 weeks, where I was living at the time. This prior, I had moved to Bainbridge, but we were not married yet. Where the apartment I was renting overlooked a beach down a bluff, and Donna came out of quiet time one morning and said, "What if David?" Well, actually, need to take a step back because this is important. So the next day, after TED showed
Yeah.
up,
Mm-hmm.
I walked into Donna's house. Donna was working on a book out of her public leadership experience. It was on the
Uh-huh.
phone with the editor, right, a publishing consultant that she'd been working with named Cece. And I walked into the house and she said, and I'd met with Cece about the idea. I thought I was going to be writing a left brain, more
Uh-huh.
academic kind of book.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Donna said, oh, Cece, David's model has a name. And Cece said, well, what is it? I said, well, it's TED, the empowerment dynamic. And Cece said, hand David the phone. And so Donna
Uh-huh.
handed me the phone.
Uh-huh.
And Cece, who has this wonderful Texas accent,
Uh-huh.
said, okay, dear, let me tell you what you've done. I said, what have I done? She said, you have anthropomorphized the concept. Now I want you to write a story. And I was like,
Yeah.
you want me to what? So that teed up playing around with how can I approach this as a story? Because I knew that there had to be the models and
Uh-huh.
the visuals.
Uh-huh.
And Donna, we were at my place. We came out of quiet time. She said, "What if the conversation takes place on a beach and Ted etches the models in the sand. And I was like, wow, where did that come from? Uh, and
All the inspiration coming.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I know one of the other questions that you're curious about
Yeah.
is how the other characters evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And so had the idea of a conversation taking place on the beach and I knew what the models would be around the orientations, the triangles, and dynamic tension,
Yeah.
the creating outcomes. So I put together a couple of friendly focus groups, if you will. I think I had a
Oh.
total of 3 of them,
Mm-hmm.
and just on flip charts shared with them the ideas. And a couple things. One is I remember the first little focus group, one of the participants said, "There's no female here." And I was like, "You're right. There needs to be a female
Mm-hmm.
presence."
Mm-hmm.
And Sophia, the wise
Yeah.
woman, was born out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that was a bit of a surprise to me is that there was some pushback on both teacher and servant. And, for some
Mm-hmm.
people, well, I've been blessed to have some really great teachers, and I've had some really terrible teachers,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that being true for others. And
Yeah.
then the word servant, even though it was well intended, just the whole servitude that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of
Mm-hmm.
challenged. And so what emerged out of that was challenger as the
Yeah.
antidote to persecutor, and coach as the antidote to the rescuer.
Yeah.
And then there were just in the writing of the book, which in terms of writing went pretty quickly, about 6 months, because I was still doing quite a bit of organizational work.
Yeah.
And there are just some magical moments in the writing process. I mean, I truly feel I was guided. I'll give you one, for instance, that is always stuck in my mind. So there's a scene where Sophia comes into the story the second day of David and Ted's conversations,
Uh-huh.
and she comes running up the beach, and she has a headband on her wrist. Not She wasn't wearing the headband, and I was like, why why does she have a headband on her wrist? And so I just let it be there as it was emerging. Of course, I'm getting edited by Cece as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to the chapter on dynamic tension, which Robert Fritz called structural or creative tension,
Mm-hmm.
and always use a rubber band to illustrate the
Uh-huh.
tension, she takes her headband off her wrist and uses that to illustrate the concept of dynamic tension.
Wow.
So there were just magical moments along the way like that.
Yeah. Wow.
So there's the story.
That is incredible. The word servant, we talk a lot about, especially in the Mission Driven Mom program, that we are
Mm,
becoming servant leaders. In my book, The Mission Driven Life,
mm,
there's
mhm,
7 laws of life mission. The first 4 are preparatory, where you work on yourself and then you go lead in your communities. And that fourth culminating preparatory law, it's loving God, loving yourself, loving truth, and loving humanity. And learning to
mm,
love humanity is becoming a servant leader. That's the subtitle of that chapter.
mhm.
And so
Love it.
servant leadership is a lot. We've talked a lot about that. And I actually have
Mhm,
several books on servant leadership. And
mhm.
there's a book, you've probably heard of it. I can't remember the author's name, called The Servant. And he taught
Yes.
servant leadership
Mhm,
all over the world. But it just reminded me, because he talked about the same kind of thing, that he would get pushback on the word servant. But he was like,
mm,
I don't know how else. And then he tells a story of a man that he's in life crisis, and he goes into a monastery to
mm,
have an experience for a week, and he learns certain valuable things about what it means to be a true
mm,
servant leader and what leadership
mhm,
should really look
mhm,
like. And there's crossover. He talks about the marriage of the head and heart, like you do.
mhm.
Anyway, so fascinating, that coming to some of those common principles and ideas.
Well, very much aligned. I have no issue with the term servant. And one of the things that you've said actually a couple of times, I just really want to explicitly call out in the positive sense, is
Yeah.
that the power of TED is written as a fable on self-leadership. And
Yes.
that was done purposefully. And I've got to tell you, Audrey, that I wrote the book because I needed to write the book, and I felt called to write the book. And
Yes.
I felt, well, it was part of my calling, consistent with the mission statement I shared with you.
Yeah.
And it was almost kind of a hobby because again, I was doing so much
Yeah.
travel, so much work in organizational leadership. It's a self-published book, and
Mhm.
it just baby step at a time. I remember Donna and I were traveling to Vietnam to visit Donna's oldest daughter who was trekking around Southeast Asia, and
Oh, wow.
we were changing planes in Seoul, South Korea,
Hmm.
and I checked on Amazon and I said, Donna, somebody bought the book.
As a self-published author, I totally get that moment.
And then just several meetings and conversations along the way. And what started to happen is organizations and a group in Dallas, Texas called the Stegan Leadership Academy found out about the book, started to adopt it. Everybody would go through their leadership programs,
Yeah.
kind of like what you're doing, got a
Hmm.
copy of the book,
Hmm.
and it just really took off. And it's
Wow.
still 20 years later is selling very, very well on
Yeah.
Amazon and other places. And I just feel eternally blessed to be doing this work, and is my full-time work now. It has been for a good 10 years. And
Wow.
a lot of my focus these days is, I used to do quite a few workshops pre-pandemic. Now my primary focus is on building our community, what we call our community of practice. And
Uh-huh.
with the bringing online in 2019, the three vital questions, which
Yeah.
is, as you know, is an
Yeah.
organizationally
Such a
based
good book.
fable.
Hmm.
And so we have about 125 certified trainers in 9 countries now, and
Wow.
been doing that now all virtually. And that's really my
Wow.
focus. And where we are now is that, so I have an outcome state, actually have a couple of outcome statements related to the Center for the Empowerment Dynamic, but our real big one, audacious, if you will, is that the Center
Hmm.
for the Empowerment Dynamic has the infrastructure, the people, and the financial resources to abundantly serve the next 7 generations.
Wow.
And the notion of 7 generations comes out of indigenous thought process. There are a number of tribes that, as councils would meet, that would be one of their frames is how, if we make this
Wonderful.
decision, how's that going to impact 7 generations down the road?
Generations.
And you think about that. So that's the grand outcome statement. The current outcome statement is really around, so what's going to be the next generation? Because
Yeah.
I need to say, this work is not about me. This work is not
Yeah.
about Donna. As woo-woo as this may sound to some people, this work, I am eternally grateful that this work came through me, but
Yeah.
it's not about me. So the importance of the community of practice is that that's a big part of
Yeah.
the next generation. We haven't figured out how to really hand off the baton yet, but we're working in that direction.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so incredible. And I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for the work. I'm grateful for the inspiration. And I have seen so many powerful,
Mm,
I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people. We've had, I don't know, probably 1,200 people do the
mm,
program at this point, the
mm-hmm,
teen or the mom
mm.
program, and
Congratulations.
huge number of them just talking specifically about this transition in their frame of reference. I had a woman whose marriage had been on, and this is just one of many stories I could tell, but her marriage had been on the brink for a long time. And she finally submitted to going through the program. And when it was all done, people that knew her, that were around her, asked how her marriage was. And she said, it's great.
Mm,
And they said, well, what in the world changed? She said, well, I did that mission driven mom program. And they said, well, what
mm,
difference did that make? And she said, it taught me to take responsibility for myself,
mm-hmm,
that I have to meet my own needs and be the creator of my own life, and that I've been
mm-hmm,
expecting my husband to do that for me.
mm. So she reclaimed her agency.
Yep.
Mm-hmm,
Yep. Then I was telling you in the program, it cycles 4 times through self-care, self-leadership, and self-discovery. And this is in that first self-leadership section. And there's section headings. So they all have something: caring for my meeting my needs by whatever is the self-care section. Well, in
mm,
the self-leadership section, every subheading for that section is increasing my personal power by.
Mm.
And in this section, in the section that your book is in, it's increasing my personal power by becoming a creator. And we had designed some printouts, little mini posters that people can print off and hang up in their mirror, in their home, in their room. And the first one says, I am a creator. And I interviewed one of the students recently. This podcast came out, and she said that when she read the book and went through that section and then pulled up her card to hang up on her wall, when she read it, tears came to her eyes, and she was like, that's right, I am a creator. And I asked her, and I said, what's been the impact of that? She says, all my relationships are significantly better. I stopped blaming everybody. The first thing they do is there's another poster called No Blame Zone. So I encourage them to watch their words and stop blaming. And then I'm a creator. So that's kind of how it rolls out for them. I want to tell you, I found this book because my husband was getting a marriage and family therapy degree. We had had a troubled marriage for a long time, and we had worked through a lot of key things. And he actually had a pornography addiction for a long, long time. And we found answers for that. And there's lots of other stories around that. But through all of that, all of those experiences, I don't remember precisely when, but at some point we were introduced to the drama triangle. I found that somewhere doing research or something. And it, for me, like it was for you, was just clearly true and made sense of so many things and brought human interaction to such a very simple construction that it made it so much easier and cleaner to try to navigate things. But what's ironic about it, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but I went to try to find books on it, and there were very few.
Yes.
Very few. And some of them were not all that great. And of course, there was not a whole lot of alternative to that offered. And I just researched and researched until I found your book and thought, well, he's telling me he's got it all, because it says an effective escape from the drama triangle. And I knew exactly what the drama triangle and who Stephen Karpman was. And I got online, I watched, I think there was some kind of interview between you and him at one point that was on YouTube. I think on that interview, he even said, David's model is the very best solution to the drama triangle. And I got the book and read it, and it was just blown away, and just used it in my programs ever since. So it's so helpful, but people are so unaware. It's just not commonly taught or understood. And it's so helpful, so much more helpful than even in so many little microwaves. Like today, I'm going back through the book again. I've got all my we'll talk about all these, but obviously we're not gonna get to all of them, and we can get into some of the content of the book in just a minute. But, again, I feel like every time I go back, there's something new that I needed to hear or that I see again. So for me today, it was the reminder that the reasons victims are positioning themselves as victims or struggling in their victimhood is because of, how do you say it? The death of a dream.
Yeah.
And I'm right in the middle of that. I'm right in the middle of a moment in my life where it feels like a lifelong dream is dying, and it's been incredibly painful. And it was just so vital for me to hear that today and to remember that I cannot have dreams built on other people's choices, and that past paradigms weren't helpful. And I have to move through those to be a creator again, to get back on track with what I know my call to be. I remember years ago, I had a dear friend who was really in all this crisis and grieving so many things. And she was complained to me incessantly about her husband. And I just kept saying to her, you've got to find what's yours. You've got to find what's yours. And that was brought back to my mind again with going back through the book again and looking at my notes and looking at my questions and looking at the summaries and, all of that again, all of the highlights, to just remember again. And I want to tell you and everyone listening that when I went through your coaching program, which we can touch on, which was phenomenal, it starts with a DE. It's something where you deconstruct what the problem is, and you what's it called?
Actually, It's about deconstructing, and what
Yeah.
you're referring to is
So
being able to
helpful.
look at a situation and say,
Mhm.
what, see if you can come up with 7 things that you're learning out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And even
helpful.
though it's unwanted and unwelcome, if I can, Audrey, there's so much that you've just said that I'd like to add to and build on. One thing, given your current situation, a distinction that has emerged since The Power of Ted was written,
Yeah.
this distinction is in the 3 vital questions, is the distinction between victimization and victimhood.
Yes.
And the acknowledgement that victimization is something that we all experience as
Sure.
human beings.
Absolutely.
And it's situational. I use the proverbial scale of 1 to 10, 1 being in the slow line at the grocery store again or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
10, you just have to turn on the news to see people experiencing the
Yes.
severe end of victimization. That is distinct from victimhood, which is a way of being and
Yes.
an identity. And
Yes.
this work really stands as a challenger to victimhood while acknowledging the reality of victimization.
Yes.
So,
I love that.
and when there is a dream or desire that's being denied or thwarted, whether it's from someone else or just circumstances,
Yeah.
um, I think that there are times where it's important to acknowledge our sense of victimization and to neither
And to grieve.
deny, yet
Yeah.
to grieve, yeah, and
Yes.
not to deny or minimize. And part of the power of this work, and you just gave voice to it, is that, and that you'll move beyond that. You'll
Yeah.
get back into that creator groove.
Yes.
And so I just really wanted to call that out. And I appreciate you mentioning Stephen Karpman, that the little video was shot in his
Mm-hmm.
garden.
Mm-hmm.
Donna and I had the opportunity to visit with him.
Yeah.
And when I first reached out to him as we were coming toward the finishing of the book, and Cece said, "Who would you like to have endorse the book?" I said, "Well,
Mm.
I'd love it if
Stephen
Dr.
Karpman, of
Karpman."
course.
And I don't know if he's even still alive or where he
Mm-hmm.
is, or
Mm-hmm.
so found him in the San Francisco area where he's been for a long time. Reached
Yeah.
out to him, sent him a copy of just the Empowerment Dynamic chapter,
Okay.
and can't remember now if I got an email or, oh, I know, I got a phone call. Actually, Donna and I were over at my apartment, I think cleaning. Phone rang. Donna
Mm-hmm.
answered it, and I hear Donna say, "Oh, Steve, David will be glad to know that you called." And she handed the phone to me. He said, "It's Steve Karpman." And he said, I read your chapter. I want to thank you for it. I think that this is the best, what ended up on the book. This is the best escape
Yes.
I've ever seen from
Absolutely.
the drama triangle." And I said, "Thank you." I said, "Can I use that as an endorsement?" He goes, "No, I'm sorry. I've had a long policy of not endorsing anybody's work because
Interesting.
I've been ripped off and people have taken
Yeah.
the triangle and named it themselves." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Thank you. I really appreciate it." And about 3 weeks later, I got an email from him saying, "I've thought more about it. And if I can refer to the empowerment dynamic as he says, I don't know what a dynamic is, but if I can refer to it as the empowerment triangle, you can have my endorsement." Because you are right. As I was doing research, there were a number of things that had been written, some that were okay.
Yeah.
But basically, what I found, my guess is what you found as well. Basically, what I found was, well, now that you know it, I'm going to use a bad Boston accent. Just don't do it no more. Just
I
right.
know. Yeah. Just stop
Yeah,
it.
yeah, right. Um,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, and
Not super helpful. I mean,
right.
moderately helpful, but ultimately
Mhm. Yeah,
we
but
needed
what do I
more.
do with this energy? What do
Yes.
I do with this
Yes.
focus? What do I do with
Yes.
these emotions? Yeah. So
Yes.
that's what I feel blessed to have had
Yeah.
come out of that epiphany.
Yeah. And at the end of that coaching or somewhere along the line, we were encouraged to make a statement, and you had like a little template for us that was phenomenal. And actually, I wrote, it's 2.5 pages long, and it's been kind of a working document.
Hmm.
And it's my daily creator statement. And every day that I take it out and take the time to read through it, it just recenters me. It is so,
Hmm.
so helpful.
Hmm.
And probably the most helpful phrase is that I see myself and others as creators, resourceful and capable, able to navigate life successfully.
Hmm. Wonderful. Well said.
So helpful. And it reframes the interactions I'm going to have that day and how I'm going to talk to myself and see myself and how I'm going to see the people in my life. I have 6 children. Many of them are in adulthood at this point. Those adult parent relationships are tricky to renegotiate. It's been tough.
Mm-hmm.
They've had some really hard times that we've had to walk through with them. And it's just came at a time in my life when it was so needed and has been so helpful so many times. I can't even tell you.
I am so grateful to hear that.
Yeah.
So grateful.
So I want to spend a few minutes before we finish
Mm-hmm.
talking about a few of the concepts in the book. And if there's anything, you mentioned the victimhood, victimization. I'm so glad you brought that up. Anything else you feel like that you really want to touch on? Because, of course, I'm just going to tell everybody to go read the book for themselves. It's going to take them a couple hours and they're going to refer to it for the rest of their lives and they're just going to need it. If they want to do my program, great. If they want to do your programs, great. I don't really care. I just want them to have this tool.
Wonderful.
So, near the beginning of the book, you bring up pity. You talk about how that the coach comes in, Ted comes in, and he doesn't judge, but he doesn't pity.
Right.
And then later on, David makes a comment about not pitying himself or something like that. So I wanted to ask you, why did you call attention to the concept of pity, and why was it important that Ted didn't judge or pity David? What difference was that making? Why is that part of this orientation?
Couple things. One is in framing in my own mind in the writing of the book, both the Ted character and Sophia character, is that Ted, even though he does ask some coaching questions, really embodies a challenger.
Right.
The challenger role, whereas Sophia really then embodies the coach role. The only reason why I
Oh,
bring that up,
okay.
the
That's
only reason why I
cool.
bring that up is that
Mm-hmm.
um, victims, especially someone who's in victimhood, so
Yes,
distinct from victimization, but
absolutely.
is that someone who is stuck in victimhood often pities themselves and in that sense can be pitiful. Well, a challenger, a conscious constructive challenger, as Ted is in the book and as Ted is
Mm-hmm.
in Three Vital Questions as well, is that conscious constructive challengers have compassion for the fact that change and growth is not always easy,
Yes.
but they don't stand in judgment and they see the person that they are challenging as a creator in their own right, whether they act like it or not, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
And so would not reinforce the sense of, oh, poor me, which is the pity statement. So it's really coming from a place of compassion for whatever the struggle is, for whatever is calling forth the learning and growth.
So why is the pity bad? What is that? What is the difference then between the pity and the compassion? How would that
Well,
show up if
yeah.
you were wanting to be a challenger instead of a rescuer or a persecutor? How could you tell the difference for yourself?
Hmm. Well, what comes to mind, that's a great question, Audrey. What comes to mind is that if one is feeling pity for themselves or someone else, the word that comes up for me is they're stuck. They're stuck. It's kind of like having your feet in tar, if you will, kind
Oh,
of
okay.
stuck in the pity. And
Yes.
as a challenger, rather than saying, "Gee, Audrey, you're sounding like you're in having a pity party or whatever," I
Uh-huh.
would not say that. Well, I think
Sure.
what I would do is that if I was noticing that, I'm going to use a convention that has also come up out of this work over the last 20 years, is that I would feedback to say, well, Audrey, I really get that you're really feeling stuck, that you're really feeling,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a lot of feelings in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, what's one step that you could take, whether it's a conversation, whether it's doing some journaling, what's one step, and notice I'm kind of now going into coach role, but
Yes.
what's one step that you could take
Yes.
to become unstuck,
Yes.
to begin to become unstuck?
Yes.
The convention that comes from a friend of mine who's been a long time Buddhist practitioner who
Uh-huh.
give a quick background story on this little convention. He's had the opportunity to have two private conversations, 10 minutes long each, with the Dalai Lama.
Oh,
And
wow.
he asked the Dalai Lama at one point what he should be teaching because he had a teaching background. And the Dalai Lama said, I don't know how to tell you what to teach, but I can tell you what I know that every human being needs. And
Okay.
every human being needs to be heard, seen, and loved. Heard, seen, and
Hmm.
loved.
Hmm.
And my friend Mark calls that hissel. So by acknowledging and saying to you, I really get the feelings that you're having, and I really understand. You're being heard, you're being seen, and not judged. You're being heard, you're being seen, and loved or respected.
Yeah.
If that space is created, the opens up the real possibility that you could take a baby step to start to get unstuck
Yeah.
because you've been heard, seen, and respected.
Yes. Wow, that's beautiful. You made me think of, I mean, it's very simple, it's very straightforward. You talk about it all the time. But for me, when I'm faced with someone who does look like they're in self-pity or does look stuck, even myself, just this simple reminder that they can do it. Like they can, you can do it. Like you can overcome this. Like it can be done. I know you don't see the way yet, and it has to start with an inner
Hmm.
conviction. Like I have to really believe that. I have to remind myself of why they can do it, of what resources they have available to themselves,
Hmm.
and why and how I can get behind the changes that need to be made, not by giving them the answers and not by pushing or forcing, but just by
Hmm.
believing in them. I've
Hmm.
noticed that when, and again, I don't win every time because I slip back into, I tell people all the time, I'm a recovering rescuer. And it's,
Me too.
you know, I'm a mom. I want to have the answers. I want to put Band-Aid on. I want there to be, I want there, I want everyone to feel better as fast as possible. And I want, the dreams that I've carried for 30 years and bearing and
Mm.
raising all these children to be manifest right now. That getting into that tension is painful
Hmm.
and I want it to end. But the times when it's successful, I mean, I've had two different experiences with my children where I basically reminded myself of all the reasons why they were capable and literally told God, I'm handing them off.
Mm.
They're
Mm.
yours.
Good for you.
And
Yep.
on two different occasions, I have had children come to me and say, you are different.
Mm.
And it
Mm.
was immediately after, and I didn't try to be different, but I was different because of this, the FISB, the focus interstate behavior. I didn't
Hmm.
even always notice the nuanced ways in which my behavior toward them had changed, but it was because my focus changed. So my interstate changed because I was focused on how they could do it, why they could do it, why it wasn't my role to babysit them, why it was their journey to have, why I couldn't dictate the terms, all of those kinds of concepts. Every time I stay in that space and I let them walk with God and do it on their own, our relationship gets better. They feel closer to me. They feel like I'm not trying to control anymore. But I have to be, especially when I'm really stuck, I have to be super intentional about walking myself through that whole thing. And sometimes it takes a while.
Sure. Well, and I just want to reinforce that what I hear in those descriptions, and a very powerful baby step can be the act of letting go. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that's easy. And what
Yeah.
you inherently did is that you made the focus shift from your child being a problem to solve
Yeah.
to seeing them as a creator and seeing them as a capable, resourceful, and whole, and that they do have the resources, seen and unseen, that they can draw on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So your shift of focus leads to then the what can be subtle behavioral changes.
Yeah. And them recognizing somehow intuitively that my frame of reference toward them is different. I've
Right.
not said anything to them, but it's palpable somehow that
Mm-hmm.
they're able to recognize in my countenance, in my energy, whatever, that somehow there's been a shift in me
Mm-hmm.
that then is liberating them in some way.
Because you're treating them as a creator rather
Yeah.
than reacting to them as a victim, either you feeling victimized or seeing them as a victim.
Yes.
It changes the whole
And
energy.
wanting to fix it and wanting to control it and wanting to have a different
Right.
outcome that I've prescribed, and I don't like the outcome that is happening and it's painful and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that was super helpful in the book today too is just at one point, I can't remember where it is, and I don't remember who, maybe Ted says it, that basically the the drama triangle is just fraught with ego. And you wouldn't think of as a victim as being really egotistical, but I see that in myself because it's me imposing my will.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wanting it to look a certain way because I want to look a certain way. And that
Right.
whole concept of feeling embarrassed or ashamed, I don't want to tell people that this is how things are turning out because it doesn't look the way I wanted it to look and it doesn't make me look good. And you become a mom, you become a parent, you put your life on the line, like you put it all on the line, and that includes your ego, and you don't always get to look like you're the star parent
Mm-hmm.
based on current outcomes, and
Right.
it's painful.
Well, and the other thing, Audrey, is that all three of the drama roles, victim, persecutor, and rescuer, they're all trying to control the situation.
Yes.
And ultimately, it is I oriented, whereas all three of the empowerment dynamic roles of creator or co creator, challenger, and coach are we
Yeah.
oriented. I mean, they're still focused on the other person. And
Yes.
one thing I want to add before we do go, that not to, and I'm happy to continue to talk,
Yeah.
but there's two things that I think are really important to say to your listeners.
Yes.
One is, please do not weaponize this way of being and thinking.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, one of the least empowering things you can do is to say something like, Audrey, here's this book. You really need to read this. And then what
You're
goes along
broken.
with, yeah, and what goes along with that is, I have one surefire way of you being reacted to as a persecutor, and that is just to tell the other that they're being a victim.
Yeah.
And
You mentioned that in the book too. I
yeah.
ran across that again today,
Hmm.
that you tell somebody, hey, blah, blah, you don't need to be a victim.
Hmm.
And then immediately you've built a wall between the two of you. They're just not
Exactly.
going to listen anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for
There
sure.
there are other ways of opening the doors to a more
Yes.
empowered way of being.
Yes. And to give people, and it's not even mine to give. Their freedom, their liberty, their right to choice, their right to walk, have the life. That's not even mine to give. But when I'm trying to control things, I feel like I've got to give them that. But it's just a form of letting go, I guess, is just
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
recognize it's the same kind of way, that's why we use that metaphor of giving birth, because maybe another way that you would talk about your book is giving birth to it. I gave birth to my children. I didn't create them. I'm not responsible for their life. Their life came through me. And, I
Exactly.
was talking to my daughter recently, having a better moment than some. And I just said to her, I gave you life so you could live it.
Oh, wonderful.
I
Hmm.
didn't give you life to control it.
Hmm.
And it's your life, not mine.
Hmm.
And so that's the place I try to stay in. I don't always do a
Yeah.
great job, but
Well, the drama roles, again, victim, first rescuer, I want to really emphasize that those are roles that we play, roles that we
yeah.
can draw on, and the genesis of those roles are, I think, for all of us, happen very early in life in the reactive strategies, in
Mm-hmm.
reaction to what's going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
Our true essence is that creator essence. That's who we really are,
I love that.
is we are creators, and that is not a role to play. That is a way of being to embrace.
That is
It's
so great to remember. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way, that
mm,
in drama, you're taking on a persona, but in creator, you're just being you.
Hmm.
You're being your best you.
Your best self. Yep.
Yeah.
Best
There's
and
one other
noblest.
thing I'd love to talk about. And then as we finish up, anything that you feel you also want to share, there's a
Mhm.
distinction I want to try to get clear about when it comes to later on in the book. There's the focus, interstate behavior, the FISB, and then there's the attention, intention, result.
Right.
So the drama triangle is, I guess one way of talking about it would be that it's kind of problem centered.
Oh, definitely.
And so I want to say that the TED, of course, the opposite of that, what I want to say is that the empowerment dynamic is solution focused.
Hmm.
But you chose not to use the word solution, you chose to use the word outcome. And so I wrote down, how can we tell the difference between when we're reacting to a problem
Hmm.
or we're reacting to our anxiety, and shift it so that, I guess, just talking a little bit around why is it outcome instead of solution, and how can we know that we're reacting to our own emotions rather than the problem, and shift to outcomes. Because I think there's this, what I've seen in some of my students is, maybe anxiety is too strong a word, but there's a concern that comes up around, well, but if I don't focus on the problem, I won't solve it. if I
Okay.
don't if I don't sit with it and try to brainstorm solutions, and I can see the wisdom in not using the word solution in some respects, but just if you could give more clarity
Mhm.
around how someone can navigate that for themselves, because it's really easy to try to tell yourself, I am being a creator, but still be problem focused. And you think you're doing it right because you're trying to solve the problem. And this is
Got
the
it.
way you think you need to go about it. So, what are your thoughts around that kind of nuance, maybe
Yeah.
complication for people trying
Yeah.
to
Let me
figure it
give
out?
that a shot. Didn't use the term solution because we talk about problem solving. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that the victim orientation, or let's call it problem orientation,
Yeah.
is not a problem solving orientation. It is merely a problem reacting orientation. And there's a lot that I could go into more deeply around that, but just know that it's a problem reacting. We tell ourselves we're reacting to the problem, but in reality, we're reacting to the anxiety that we feel. And if we take steps to help the problem, what tends to happen is that our anxiety diminishes. And when our anxiety diminishes, we lose energy for action. So that's one thing I want to say. The other thing is that um, absolutely problems exist. So the empowerment dynamic is not Pollyannish, is not in any way diminishing the reality of problems that we face in our lives. When we face a problem, here's the work to be done, though, is to frankly ask the question, why do I care about this problem? What is it about this problem that I care
Mm-hmm.
about? See, there's a phrase that came across a number of years ago, come from two Harvard professors, Lisa Leahy and Robert Keegan, and they make
Mm-hmm.
the observation, share this, and then I'll unpack it very quickly. The observation is that behind every complaint lies a commitment. Behind every complaint lies a
Wow.
commitment.
Writing that down.
And the reason why that's an important phrase, and the add-on question is, do we complain about things we don't care about? And of course, the
Right.
answer is no.
Right.
So if we're complaining or if we're facing a problem, to be able to ask and answer, and may need the support of someone in the coach role, is what is it about this problem that I care about? Why do I care about this? And
Right.
by unpacking what it is that I care about, gives me an opening for focusing on what it is, the outcome that I want to create. The other thing I want to say, Audrey, is that we solve problems in service to outcomes. So again, that use
Right.
of dynamic tension, it's in the use of a dynamic tension and going after outcomes, is that we identify what are the obstacles, what are the problems that we need to
Yes.
resolve in service to the outcome that we care about, that we're passionate about.
Right.
So I hope that helps.
Yes, that's super helpful. So if I take the time to unpack I'm not liking the way that I'm feeling. That's an important insight,
Mhm.
right? That
Mhm.
something's off, that there is a problem because I'm not liking the way I'm feeling in this relationship or in this circumstance or
Mhm.
whatever. And then asking myself if I'm complaining about this, if this is making me uncomfortable or angry or anxious or resentful, why? What is the center of that problem? And why do I care about it? I remember we did a little bit of this in the coaching. It
Mhm.
was super helpful. And then I think in your coaching program, then you take that and you start looking at values, which actually
Right.
values is something that we do. I built this program before I even did your coach. I did your
Mhm.
coaching program a couple of years ago. And one of the self-discovery elements is values. And this woman actually that I interviewed recently about the program, what she got out of it was the power of Ted, and another major one for her was values, recognizing
Mhm.
that she doesn't have all the same values as her husband, and that's okay, and that she
Mhm.
can honor his values and honor her values, and that she cares about things because she
Right.
values them.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that the coaching course impacted you, has been of value to you. I will tell you that Donna has further evolved the coaching curriculum. She came out with a book 2 years ago
Right. I got
called
that book.
"Who Do You Want to Be on the Way to What You Want?" Coaching with the empowerment dynamic. It's also
Yeah.
a fable, also a story, but she is doing wonderful work around working with coaches who
Mm-hmm.
want to coach with the empowerment dynamic and taking
Yes.
coaching with the empowerment dynamic to an even deeper level.
Yeah.
So,
I've had a couple of my students go on from my program to do the coaching program with
oh,
her because
cool,
they want to be
great,
coaches and they want to use that. They
great,
understand how helpful that construction
yeah,
is. So,
yeah.
yeah,
So
that's
whereas I'm focused these days on building the community of practice, she's really focused on the coaching curriculum and
wow.
working with coaches.
Yeah. Yeah. It's phenomenal. It's really, really great stuff. When you were talking before about how do you know if you're problem focused or if you're focused on the outcome, it reminded me, I think one helpful way to tell the difference is how you're feeling,
Hmm.
looking again at the Frisbee, what's your
Mhm,
focus?
mhm, and what's
And
your inner
in
state?
the,
Mhm,
what's that?
and what's your inner state? What's
Yes,
yeah,
yes, the interstate. Yep.
mhm,
And in the Robert Fritz book, the creating book that I grabbed, he has this section on tension. And he, have you ever heard the water glasses story that he tells?
tell me.
So he
I
introduces the idea of tension. They have an event, and he puts 7 glasses up at the front near the podium, and he has a pitcher of water there. And all he does is before or between or during or after presentations, he just pours water in a glass and leaves it. He doesn't say anything about it. He just lets it
mm,
be at the front of
hmm,
the room all day long and into the evening. And people start asking him, why are the water glasses there? And he would say was, that's a good question. Well, are you going to tell us? Well, that's a good question. And he just let the tension sit there of what these
ah,
glasses were. And everyone began to speculate. And then people started messing with them. Different people took drinks out of them or poured out part of the water. Someone put a flower in one of them. And then the whole section is so helpful because then
mm,
he has everybody write down what they thought the glasses meant. And then they read out all the answers. And then he deconstructs with some people who messed with the glasses why they messed with it. And it plays beautifully into the power of TED construction because some of the people were playing with them because they so desperately needed to control the situation.
mhm,
And that
mhm,
control was coming out of being in the drama triangle in some regard, in terms of they couldn't handle the tension. He talks about some of the time, he says, when we feel tension, we can deflate our goals. And a lot of times we do that.
oh
We
yeah,
deflate the importance of our values or commitments. We deflate what we really care about just to alleviate tension. People
mhm,
do that, I think, when they walk away from their faith. Sometimes they won't, the tension is so uncomfortable that they minimize how they felt about that faith at one time or another.
mhm,
But there's a myriad of ways they walk away from relationships or from jobs or from opportunities
mhm,
because, like, going back to what you said about the problem outcome issue here, it's wrapped up a lot in that tension issue. And if you can do exactly, if everyone could take your advice and ask themselves what they're committed to,
mhm,
that would lend themselves to being able to continue to care without feeling like they have to control, because that's what the tension is, right? That you have to care but not control.
mhm. And as creators, it is a discipline to be able to hold the tension and not to
Yes.
react against it. And you're so right that one of the So this is a phrase from my friend and colleague Bob Anderson, is that one of the easiest ways to reduce the tension is to compromise the
Mhm.
outcome.
Mhm.
And what he says that is so powerful is we can't invest our souls in a compromise. There's a part of us that
Yes.
knows that we're compromising it,
Yes.
but we can't hold that tension because of the anxiety that we feel in the tension. And so another thing I would like to say is that, again, this work is not Pollyannish. It seems simple, but it's not easy.
Mhm. I reread the preface again this morning, and you
Mm,
mentioned that several times, how nuanced it is, how
mm,
difficult it is to actually live it out day by day. It is a practice. We talk in my academies a lot about practicing principles. Principles are universal truths that we can apply to our lives in a myriad of beautiful ways. Everyone's going to live those principles differently, but to practice, we have to practice them to imbue them in our lives. And what you said about compromising on the outcome, on the dream, on the goal, on the vision, on the mission, goes back to what you teach us to do in taking baby steps, right? So you can alleviate the tension by decreasing the goal, or you can alleviate the tension by taking the baby step and letting
yeah.
that be enough. And I have stuff in my creator. One of the things I wrote in there is, I know that the thoughts I choose to entertain and the words I choose to speak are critical parts of what I'm creating, because they're the seeds and soil from which my creations grow.
I love it.
And
Mm,
that I am grateful for the incremental baby steps that help me manifest these outcomes, because it is the small steps that I can recognize and act on today to remain engaged in the creative process.
mhm. And that helps me remember what I was going to say is that
Good.
creating outcomes is not anxiety free. That there are times where we're
Yes.
going to feel that anxiety, and can we have that anxiety without the anxiety having us? If the anxiety has us, that's when we compromise. That's when we take less effective action. But if we can say, okay, I'm feeling anxious and I'm going to take this baby step anyway, that's a part of the process of creating outcomes. And then I guess I also want to close by saying, don't for a moment think that I don't that David Emerald is always in the creator orientation. I'm a human being just like all of us, and I certainly have times that I go reactive. But I think
Yes.
the measure of this work is that I like to think I catch myself more quickly, and I take baby step actions, yeah, more quickly and more consciously. But reacting and feeling that anxiety is part of the human experience.
Yes.
Experiencing victimization is part of the human
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
So we need to have compassion for ourselves around that as well.
Yes. Yes. What's so liberating for me is to feel like I don't have to stay stuck, and that I have
Right.
tools,
Exactly.
and that there's something I can turn to. I mean, obviously, I've always been a person that turned to God, turned to
Hmm.
scripture. Those things are helpful, but all I do is find these principles reflected there too.
Hmm.
I find that God brings me back to them because they're truths.
Hmm.
And with you were talking about anxiety, it just reminded me. I don't remember it was the first time I read the book, but one of the times that I read the book, maybe when I was teaching it or something, I remember just having this really clear epiphany, like, well, you're gonna feel uncomfortable either way. You're gonna, like, for me, that was a huge thing. Like, I'm gonna feel anxious either way. So I rather like be moving towards something than always reacting to something if I'm
Right.
gonna feel anxious either way.
There you go. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been so great. Such a privilege.
Thank you.
Again, such an honor. I really, really can't thank you enough for the
Mm,
mission you're engaged in, how you've given your life to it, what you've given to so many people that I interact with. What a blessing it's been in my personal life. I've taught it to my
mm.
children. It's blessing their lives. One of my kids said recently, well, I just need to be a creator. And I was like, yay. So
Well,
it's
this has been
working.
inspiring. This has been an inspiring conversation to me, Audrey, and I really appreciate the
Good.
invitation very much.
Yes, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, David. Bless you for all the work that you
Thank
do.
you.
Please, everybody, head over to it's right here,
TheEmpowermentDynamic.com.
theempowermentdynamic.com. Check out all the programs. There's a lot to engage in there. There's 3 of your books between you and Donna that I've read, loved them all, highly recommend them all. At the very least, grab The Power of TED, do your best to
Mhm.
engage with it and to live it out, because I can promise you even the attempt will radically change and bless your life. So thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time.